Hey guys, it's Liv here. In today's video, we're going to be ranking every fighting type ever in competitive Pokemon. If you guys enjoy this and you want to see some more like this, of course, leave a like below and subscribe and answer a common question of the day. What is your favorite fighting type to use in competitive this generation? I would say mine is probably either Annihilate or Great Tusk. I think they're both really fun, but Quackball definitely gets us third place for sure. Shout outs to the Gay Duck, of course, really big MVP, and I look forward to getting to use it in the future. But with that said, let's start off with the rankings. Of course, we do have our inaugural S tier for the Arceus form. Essentially, what you need to get the S plus for is you need to be more broken than this. The S plus resembles Pokemon that are so actually low drawback that you actually hurt your team not running them, unless if you're running another S plus over them and you outright have to make that choice. The S tiers for Pokemon that you could still definitely be running on a team, they'll benefit you a lot, such as Arceus, where they're usually versatile enough picks with well-rounded stats, and you can usually get a lot of mileage out of these mons. The A tier is going to be for Pokemon that you'll usually get success with, but you're not necessarily, these aren't going to be your first choices on any given team, but they're usually going to be on a team. The B tiers are going to be for Pokemon that will at least be relevant enough in practice to where you might not necessarily be running them, but you will probably be fighting them a common amount. These are Pokemon that you would usually be seeing around like the 5-ish% usage, to where you'll fight them once or twice in a laddering session, or at least a couple times, but they're not necessarily going to be coming up in every game. The C tiers are going to be for Pokemon that will provide a specific role in the metagame that is viable enough to justify their usage. This would be something like countering an S tier or an S plus, or at least being a good check to a handful of them. The D tier is for YouTuber picks, really stuff that you would only see in a YouTuber thumbnail to try and get clicks. This would be highly representative of the Mubirdier vid a couple days ago, where I threw that in the thumbnail because no one else would be stupid enough to use it. But I would never personally justify this in any given regional team. And the F tier for Pokemon that are so bad that even I wouldn't touch using these. To put in perspective, this would be stuff like after using Bramblegast once, I would never recommend that Pokemon again. Or just any other like really terrible, horrendous pick. That would essentially get in the F tier. So with that said, I do want to get the inaugural definitively broken Pokemon out of the way, where we have Koraidon, of course. Koraidon speaks for itself, guys. If you somehow do not have Koraidon in your S tier, you're actually kidding yourself, or your S plus, I should say, you're kidding yourself. His ability is outright insanely broken, and it makes Arceus look like a B tier Pokemon, to be honest, as far as the restricteds go. Really, it makes every restricted fighting look like that, besides a couple, which I'll get into those couple in a bit. But Koraidon essentially has a really big benefit of course, not only setting Sun, which is probably the best weather of this generation, with partners such as Fluttermane, Great Tusk, Sandy Shocks, all being incredibly viable picks with this. But on top of it as well, you have the ability to gain your attack boost off of the Sun by 1.3 times. Now, this is incredibly useful because you can also utilize a Terrestrial Fire set, which not only helps mend your Fairy weakness, that is 4 times Fairy Weak, into an outright resistance, but it also gives you essentially a third stab that is also then boosted by the Sun even further, which allows sets like Flame Charge with Swords Dance, or even just Flare Blitz for attack sets be really valuable, as it does give you a really strong way to harm fairies, which your dual stabs do not end up doing. Overall, an incredibly strong pick for any given team, really low drawback, and I think it's really one of the best offensive pieces that you could actually have in this current format, even if we were including Legends, of course. And I think it is actually strong enough to rival Miraidon. It's a whole different discussion, but I think that it does have a lot of a place in this metagame, as it is arguably easier to clear weather with viable picks than it would be, well, easier to clear terrain with viable picks than it would be to clear weather, while still actually putting up a matchup presence. And I can mention this specifically through the manual terrain that a Pokemon like Grimmsnarl would provide. Misty Terrain, I think, is a lot easier to just set up in this format than bringing something like an unviable weather setter to just clear Miraidon on Koraidon. Because who's really bringing Rain as a switch into Koraidon when it's still going to nuke you with a Dragon Attack anyway? When at least Grimmsnarl can outright neutralize and actually threaten Miraidon with stuff like Spirit Break. And as a partner next to Koraidon, you can actually really make this into your advantage, as I did in Paldea Prologue. And I think that alone speaks volumes of why I think Koraidon, despite being on paper less broken, is actually able to stand its ground against Miraidon, which is why we give it the S plus for sure. Arceus Fighting still is a really good versatile stat move pool. 120 all around is nothing to snuff at. And with the pure fighting typing, despite the fact that it's not exactly the greatest typing in the world as a solo typing, Arceus does make good use out of it, especially with its coverage pool, allowing it a really good no drawback special fighting move, which is pretty hard to come by, considering unless you're getting Aura Sphere, which even then it still has a huge damage output decrease compared to stuff like Focus Blast, isn't really that great. And with Focus Blast as well, you're obviously gambling the accuracy. Arceus doesn't have to worry about that, though. It's one of the only special fighting types in the entire game that doesn't have that issue. So that alone gives it the S tier placement for sure, despite the fact that, again, it's not the best defensive typing, and it's a pretty okay offensive typing in this format. But overall, Arceus definitely gets that solid placement for sure. Primate. Primate's definitely a YouTuber one for sure. It gets a D tier. But the Violate and Rage Fist, this actually can, in theory, do some damage. The pure fighting typing is at least okay, but it doesn't really gain you anything over the ghost fighting type that Annihilate has, because that typing is outright insane. We've seen this on Pokemon like Marshadow, for example, in the past, where this typing is actually insanely obnoxious to switch around, and it's pretty impossible to actually get a defensive check to this. So the fact that Annihilate actually gets that for stab, and the best thing Primate gets is the fact that it can hold and Violate. Despite the fact that, of course, Primate isn't exactly useless, I wouldn't really ever recommend this Pokemon by any means, but Rage Fist is such a broken move that Annihilate does get the placement for sure. Objectively speaking, it would be a crime not to rank this. Regular Paldean Tauros, this gets a D tier. I think that Paldean Tauros on paper is actually not a terrible Pokemon, but the other two forms are just so much better that this actually is just kind of a YouTuber pick, to where you would only really run this to either say you're running triple Tauros on a team, or the fact that you just want to say you're running the worst Tauros form in the game, which I say that because of the fact that you can't technically use the regular Tauros currently, as it is not allowed in VGC. So you could technically make that work if you were trying to, shoehorn in a thumbnail saying using the worst Tauros in VGC and, like, I don't know, trying to, like, get wins with it or something. I don't fucking know. I am not the smartest with this. But it's definitely a D tier for sure. Paldean Tauros Blaze, this honestly gets a C tier, with Paldean Aqua Tauros getting a B tier. I think they might, actually no, I'm gonna raise them both up one tier. Actually, they're both pretty good. With Paldean Tauros Blaze, you do get a few things that benefit you outside of the Aqua Tauros. For one, you have a Fairy Resistant, well, a Fairy Neutrality instead of a Weakness to Fairy, which is pretty cool. You also get Will-O-Wisp, which is actually a pretty big thing. The only other Intimidator that gets that is Arcanine, and while Arcanine is a fucking amazing Intimidate option, Tauros does have some few benefits to it, such as Raging Bull, of course, being a great screens breaker while being stabbed, on top of as well the fact that it does have a slightly better edge in the speed tier being 100. They don't really matter a ton for what it's worth, but it's a little bit of stuff that does benefit Tauros, technically speaking. Aqua Tauros definitely, though, is the better one for sure of the Tauros forms. This is an incredible water type as far as just water types go. It's definitely a better water fighting than Quaquaval for sure on any given team. It's a great rain partner actually with stuff like Wave Crash and Aqua Jet, which is one of the biggest benefits to Paldean and Aqua Tauros. In fact, this has a viable priority option and the other two really don't. If you had something that was like a weak Aqua Jet but for fire that was on Paldean Blaze Tauros, I think you could actually justify putting both in the A tier. But the fact that this has priority that can be rain boosted does actually give rain a lot of merit here, as really the only viable option that gets that outside of this would be, honestly, it's really just Palafin. You could technically run other Aqua Jet Pokemon, but Palafin's really the only other super viable one, and the fact this does provide Intimidate support as well does allow Pokemon like Baxcalibur to be outright demons, and we've actually seen this partner with Baxcalibur to win literally the first regional, being San Diego. So I definitely got to give props to Paldean and Aqua Tauros. I think it's still a great pick, but it's definitely fallen off a little bit in this format, which is why I was almost going to put it in B. But I do think that with the incoming Ruin Pokemon soon, that we will actually see this Pokemon rising again, as it's a pretty decent Qianpao check. For what it's worth, both Tauros forms actually are, but I think the Aqua Tauros will have a slightly better meta placement, though I think this will end up being, with Regulation C, the best Paldean Blaze Tauros format we've actually had. So I am inclined to see what we will actually get out of these two Pokemon. They're both pretty solid picks though, A and B tier respectively. We have the Galar Zapdos. Galar Zapdos will also get an A tier today. I think this will be a little bit less good of a format than it was in last generation, at least before the restricteds came into play, but I think that Galar Zapdos will still have a place for sure. We're seeing a bit of Intimidators come in the format, with Arcanine being one of the most used Pokemon currently, and we still have usage from stuff like Salamence and Gyarados from time to time. But with Galar Zapdos, though, I think it's actually a pretty strong offensive option here for sure. With 100 base speed and the ability to find, this is one of the best ways to actually pressure Intimidate mons, and we've already seen even stuff like Annihilate putting a ton of pressure on opponents this format. Despite the fact that Annihilate definitely would be the better option with Defiant for fighting going in this format, I think that Galar Zapdos does have a few benefits here. For one, I think that Thunderous Kick being a really strong way to damage stuff like Dondozo, for example, would actually be an incredible niche for this. However, obviously Rage Fist can still boost past that anyway, but the fact that you can enable a partner with the physical offensive stat to actually break through it as well would be pretty beneficial, and it's something that Annihilate can't actually do, since you would be dropping your opponent's physical defense, and in tandem with another physical attacker, you could actually use this as a Dondozo check, at least with the right Terra typing, of course. You wouldn't be able to just do it with any type of Pokemon. But if I partner this next to something like, let's say, for example, Meowscarada, I could cover both the Terrestrial Steel option by just going for Thunderous Kick, as well as going for Flower Trick to beat sets that would not be, I guess Mono Flying would be, the best way to handle both, but even still, Dondozo isn't exactly running that right now anyway. It's fallen off a lot, though it might end up rising, I guess, for stuff like Galar Zapdos. In theory, though, I think that this mon does have a lot going for it, and it will overall be a strong pick for the metagame for sure. It's definitely on the lower end of A tier, but I would at least give it right below the Paldean Tauros Aqua for sure. Definitely a strong pick to consider, A tier. Heracross gets, honestly, this thing gets a C tier. I think that Heracross with Guts alone makes it a kind of viable pick. The fact that you could throw this on a Tailwind team and actually get some pretty good damage. But it's probably going to end up being one of the weakest C tiers we have today. This might drop to D tier depending on how the list goes. But Guts with 85 speed actually does arguably make this thing a kind of viable Tailwind mon. You could utilize this with the, honestly, probably just like a normal typing Terrestrial and get some good mileage and facade damage. Or you can end up going for like a Terra Blast with like a Steel and make this into a Fairy Resist and then check Fluttermane that way. But I'm not really too sure what Heracross will end up doing. I think it has enough tools to where, with the right Terra type, you could maybe actually get some good use out of this. But I feel like it would be a very Terra-reliant Pokemon because Bug Fighting is a pretty terrible typing for it. It's still a C tier for sure. It has enough going for it to where I gotta give it C tier. The Hisuian Sneasel, this thing gets, honestly, this thing definitely gets a high D tier. I'm gonna put it right below a Primate for sure. This thing's speed tier at 115 is good for it, but the 95 attack isn't really great. This is just a worse version of Sneasel, not Sneasel, his Sneasler, I should say. And I think it's also just a worse Sneasel clone for sure, because I think the difference being is the fact that the other Sneasel would have a little bit more going for it in its favor. For one, if we compare Sneasel versus Hisuian Sneasel, one of the first things that you obviously notice is the fact that Hisuian Sneasel can't be Thunder Wave by Prankster Mons, which is a pretty big benefit. Not only this, but Hisuian Sneasel also does lack the ability to Surf, which was one of the biggest niches you would actually run regular Sneasel for, being the fact that you could Surf into Colossal, which was a niche that it actually did have, and it was a fairly good niche for it. Now, Pull obviously does that job better, and it's a lot more of a consistent mon outside of just popping Surf, but it was a niche that Sneasel did have going for it. The fact that it was a Fake Out plus Surf roll compression, this mon can't even actually do that. One of the other hits that this mon does take is the fact that there's not actually a reason to run this thing outside of Inner Focus over Sneasler. But the difference being is that Sneasler also has a lot better abilities to where, unlike Weavile, you do have a reason to actually run an active ability on that. When you compare Weavile and Sneasel, for example, one of the biggest downsides to Weavile is the fact that it doesn't have a good ability in the format, whereas Sneasler actually would have one, being Unburdened. Poison Touch is also a pretty good ability in itself anyway, so it actually has two pretty viable abilities, whereas Sneasel on Weavile didn't really have any that benefited it, because Pressure wasn't a good long-term ability, and Pickpocket never really activates in a majority of situations. So Sneasel with Inner Focus actually did have a niche over Weavile in that regard. But Sneasel Hisuian form doesn't really have that niche over Hisuian, over Sneasler anyway. I'm gonna get so confused by that this whole video, by the way. I almost can call that Hisuian Weavile. But the point being, though, is that there's not really a reason to actually run this over Hisuian Weavile. I'm just gonna call it that for now because I'm getting so fucking confused by the names. It's tripping me up really badly. But because of that, we're gonna give it the D tier. Breloom. Breloom's an okay Pokemon, actually. This has a few things going for it. For one, Spore, incredible fucking move. It's so fucking good on this Pokemon. But two, Mach Punch is a pretty good ability. Not a good ability, a good move. With Technician, this can actually do some insane damage, though Poison Eel is also pretty good. It has really just a great enough stat spread, and it's a good typing, at least offensively speaking, considering the fact that you do have the immunity to Spore and Rage Powder, while also getting a good priority stat that can handle Steals, which would otherwise be threatening your your grass typing. I'm gonna give Breloom, I'm gonna give this thing a low B tier. It's definitely worse than Paldean and Blaze Tauros, but it still has a lot going for it. Bullet Seed is great with loaded dice. You can get some good mileage out of Sash with Rock Tomb. This is an amazing Pokemon for Tailwind, in my opinion, because you can use it as a good Spore user on Tailwind, and it's the fastest one that you get. You can actually manage to invest in the speed without hurting your stat line in general, because this thing does have a lot of merit in investing in speed to begin with, but you can creep bundle pretty easily with this without having to really give up a lot of investment. And also, again, your typing would benefit you more for bundle because you still have Mach Punch, at least as an offensive way to threaten that, which is something that has over Bonnet, the fact that you can handle bundle even without going for Tailwind, which is pretty cool. But overall, though, Breloom honestly does have a lot going for it in this format. I think it's a little bit underexplored, but it's still a pretty cool enough pick to where we're going to give the B tier. Hariyama's up next. Hariyama, this might be a hot take, but I'm actually going to give Hariyama the top of B tier. I think Hariyama's still actually really good. I'm kind of shocked we haven't seen more top cut performances from it, but I think it's just because of the fact that most people assume it's outright unviable because of Iron Hands existing, which I actually think is just completely untrue. Iron Hands does lose in one regard to Hariyama, and it's a pretty big one. Well, actually, there's two regards actually that Iron Hands loses completely. For one, Guts is actually a pretty incredible ability for Hariyama, considering the fact that you have such an irreplaceable item, an item that no one else on your team is actually going to have to run, being the Flame Orb. Hariyama does have this huge benefit over Iron Hands, considering the fact that Iron Hands does actually have item slot competition. Whether it's Citrus Berry, which you're competing with mons like Amoonguss or Arcanine with, whether it's Assault Vest, which you're competing with mons like Kingambit, and keep in mind, all of these are really good partners to pair with Iron Hands. It's not like these are some niche picks where you're running a mon that you would never actually partner. These are all incredible partners. Even still, Arcanine can also run an Assault Vest commonly, and it even runs that in tandem with Iron Hands at the times, so having to pick those items is already a big nerf to it. And also Safety Goggles, a great item in Iron Hands. And you know who else runs that? Fucking Arcanine. Every one of Iron Hands' items is a viable item on Arcanine, which is one of the most common partners you throw on this thing anyway. You know what's not a common item on Hariyama? Any of those. You're never actually running an item besides Flame Orb in this format, and it's such a unique presence that Hariyama does provide that it already has a huge window of opportunity to actually open up for your team by running Flame Orb. Now, that's not to say it's a better Pokemon, because I think that Iron Hands gives a lot of opportunity to teams that Hariyama can never dream of rivaling, but there is one other reason you would actually run Hariyama very viably over Iron Hands, and that's Wide Guard. Iron Hands does not even get this move, and Hariyama gets it. It allows it a great opportunity for Trick Room builds to get around stuff like Eruption Torkoal, or even just Expanding Force Armor Rouge, where you can pair this with Terra Dark and essentially cause a 50-50 of, will I just click Wide Guard in pre-Terra and Terra another mon? Will I click Wide Guard and just go for Terra Dark to get around Heat Wave? Will I not click Wide Guard and just go for Terrestrial Dark to get around your Expanding Force? There's a lot of different scenarios this does create, and I think that Hariyama, actually objectively speaking, has a really strong place in the metagame, despite the fact that his usage does not reflect that. I'm curious to see if Hariyama will end up top cutting again in the future. I think it does have a lot of promise, and I think it's really just one of the most underrated Pokemon by far right now in the format. I would love to see some more Hariyama usage popping up. I think it genuinely has a strong meta placement even still, and I'm still a huge believer in this Pokemon doing well. Easy top of B tier. There's genuinely not going to be a Pokemon that will even come close to ranking this in B tier, and I would borderline consider putting this in A, and I might do that later on in the list, but we'll have to see what else gets in there. Next up is Medicham. Medicham's actually pretty cool. This gets a top of C for now. Honestly, Skill Swap with huge power. We've seen this do well with Tyranitar in Series 1, and I think it still kind of has a place in this Series 2 metagame. I'm pretty sure we've actually seen Medicham do pretty well at a couple of regionals. If I remember correctly, Orlando actually had a top cut with Medicham, or at the very least, it had a team that got CP with Medicham. I would have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure at least one team this generation did actually have a top cut performance with Medicham, and I'm currently pulling that up right now actually just to verify, but I'm fairly certain that regional was Orlando. I don't think I've seen it since then, but I'm almost certain that Orlando, if not, no, Liverpool is definitely not Series 2, but I'm pretty certain that Medicham, no, it was not Orlando. Was it OCIC? It was not OCIC. I know there was a regional where this thing did actually have a placement. It was not Bochum. Was it Knoxville? I know it was one of the more recent ones. It's not this one. Maybe I am just thinking of the. Maybe I'm just thinking of the fucking. Maybe I'm just thinking of Series 1. I really thought that Medicham did have a Series 2 placement, but even still, I think it does have a place in this metagame, at least with Skill Swap. We've seen a lot of Tyranitar usage popping up in the ladder, so I definitely do think, yeah, Medicham had, it had two actually top cut placements in San Diego. Well, one top cut, and then one in the senior division, it top cut as well, but senior had such a small player pool. The 21st overall in Masters, though, is actually pretty cool. And then, what about for Liverpool? Did it? No, it didn't for Liverpool. So San Diego was its only top cut performance. I still have faith in this Pokemon actually being kind of viable. I think that realistically, with Tyranitar's usage popping up a lot, this was actually a really good Tyranitar partner, and I look forward to seeing more success with it later on in the generation. Maybe right now is a little bit of down tilt, but fighting types in general will have a huge buff when Scarlet and Violet Series 3 comes out, and especially with stuff like Psychic Stab for matchups like Terra Poison on Wo-Chien or Ting-Lu, this might actually have a place as a fighting type that could pressure the Terra Poison sets, which I do think will be one of the most common types on both Ting-Lu and Wo-Chien. It might not be the most common, but I think it will at least be common enough to warrant Medicham for consideration. So look out, Medicham, your time is coming soon. Easy C tier. Lucario gets a C tier as well. Terra normal sets honestly could be pretty viable in this mon, especially with Inner Focus. If I remember correctly, this one actually did top cut a regional pretty recently. I think this one was, I want to say this was Perth. It might have been at least day 2. It might not have top cut necessarily, but I know this thing actually did pretty well at a regional recently. No, this actually wasn't a regional. It was an online tour. I was reading through VGC Pace chat. I was mixing it up. Even still, this thing actually isn't terrible. I think the Inner Focus, the fact that you can't get flinched, and the fact that you could go for essentially a really shitty budget Dragonite, with one benefit being the fact that you can cover both fairies and also just have the typing with fighting that can pressure through steals that would actually wall through you pretty well. It's a great check to stuff like Tyranitar. You get a pretty nice 90 speed stat as well, which is slightly faster than Dragonite, which is pretty cool. Overall, I'm going to give it the C tier. I think it's not terrible. Toxicroak, one of the worst formats that Toxicroak has honestly ever had. For one, Toxicroak just honestly with that 85 speed tier, it's pretty competitive right now in terms of even just other fighting types. We have stuff like Quaquaval. We have stuff like there was another fighting type that I'm thinking of. The point being is we definitely have a lot of other mons in that like 85-ish realm, and the offenses just are not that good this generation. However, the typing is pretty decent. You still do have priority at the very least. However, that is actually no longer with Vacuum. Oh no, it is with Vacuum Wave. You still have Vacuum Wave, thank God. Between Vacuum Wave and Sucker Punch, you do have some merit. I'd probably go with like a Terra Dark set if I was to run this. Overall, I don't think Toxicroak is that great, but I'm gonna give it the bottom of C tier. I think Dry Skin alone is enough of a reason to run this. However, I think objectively stuff like Storm Drain is a better form of redirection, as you can outright draw targets into you directly and force that. With Dry Skin, it's not really a huge benefit with the water immunity, though it exists, I guess, in an endgame scenario. But Poison Touch is still not a bad ability, same as Anticipation, but Anticipation lost a lot of merit in Open Sheet. So I'm going to give it the C tier. Definitely the worst generation that I can remember Toxicroak having. I look forward to seeing it do well soon, just not right now. We have Gallade up next. Gallade's a pretty good mon, actually. I'm going to give this thing the B tier right above the Paldean Tauros Blaze. It's a great check to Tendozo, probably still one of the better checks that we have in the format. With stuff like Sacred Sword getting around the steel sets, as well as just any neutral set, really. If you're going to go with the flying sets, you still have stuff like Psycho Cut that can at least crit through those neutrally. You have Leaf Blade, which is great for the pre-Terra sets. You're still also great against Garganacl with that, but if you're worried about Terra Ghost Garganacl, you could run Night Slash. Scope Lens in general is just a great ability, a great item on this with the Sharpness ability, which is going to boost all your slashing moves, which all 4 of those moves are actually boosted. Leaf Blade, Psycho Cut, Sacred Sword, and Night Slash, all 4 are boosted, which is incredible. On top of this as well, you do have the ability to run Focus Energy, which is pretty good. It allows you to pretty much guarantee your crits at least near 100% of the time. And you can also, if you feel like not boosting damage output, or at least the critical hit chance, you can go with a Wide Guard set, which is pretty valuable, as it's a really great way for Gallade to function around Trick Room builds. It's a pretty unique mon for sure. There's a lot of things that can do similar roles to Gallade, but none of them do every role that Gallade can actually do. And if you really want to run Gallade, there's no real replacement for this thing, which is kind of the one niche that this thing does have, is it's such a unique compression of roles that despite the fact that it will never do any of them well, I like to think this is essentially the Mew syndrome, where Mew can do a lot of shit, but it does a lot of shit pretty average as far as doubles goes, because you can definitely 2-tap Gallade pretty easily with a lot of different common Pokemon, but there's never going to be a Pokemon that will actually do everything that Gallade can provide for a team, and it does the job kind of well, actually. Whether you're going to go for like an Imprisoned set, whether you're going to go for Wide Guard, whether you're going to go for Trick Room, whether you're going to go for critting everything, you can make all of them work, and Gallade on preview, especially on ladder, does have a huge benefit of just being kind of an unknown force. So we're going to give Gallade the B tier. I think it's actually kind of good. Definitely a lot worse than Open Sheet, but I think on ladder at least, this still has a huge place in the meta, in my opinion. Let's do it, Lilligant. Now this mon actually will be kind of deadly, I can't lie. The fact that this does give Sun a 105 speed tier Pokemon with Chlorophyll, this does have a huge benefit actually, in one regard, being the fact that you can actually outpace every single booster energy mon without even going for Jolly, which is a pretty big deal actually. Now Lilligant would need the Timid nature to do that, but with the Adamant nature, you can actually just go for max speed, and you even creep Lilligant, like just Timid Lilligant with that. So Hisuian Lilligant already has a huge benefit of just being like the best speed abuser for Sun. Not only this, but you have a 1-5 attack stat, which is pretty threatening. This is also a pretty decent Tailwind option though with Hustle, and Tailwind's already on a huge high right now, so the fact that you have Hustle as well is a huge benefit, as especially on ladder, if you pair this with like a Talonflame on like a Sun team, you could realistically either go for Sunny Day and catch opponents off with that, or you can go with Tailwind and just catch opponents off guard, which Tailwind as well doesn't really reveal anything about your ability, which is pretty good. You have stuff like Close Combat, for example, is a really strong option. Ice Spinner is great for birds. You have Petal Blizzard as well as Solar Blade, which is great, especially Solar Blade on Sun is really valuable. Trailblaze can also just be a nice way to boost your speed, but you never really need it with this mon, to be honest. If you have Acrobatics, or if you want to run the Hustle set, you have Aerial Ace, which is pretty good for you. It's a great Terrestrial abuser. I would probably run Rock on this if I was to choose, as it helps a lot with other fire types. Your Axe Kick is a pretty good move as well, but I wouldn't really run that over Close Combat, considering the fact that Axe Kick, despite the fact that you have a 30% chance for confusion, it's essentially high jump kick as well, which is not that great in a format with so heavy protect mons. But overall, this is definitely a good mon. You can even throw on Healing Wish support, which is pretty valuable to bring back a Paradox mon, which on Sun would be incredible. This also does, of course, have Victory Dance, which is a unique move to this Pokemon, being a physical Quiver Dance option, which helps you even further with damage options. And if you pair this thing with like some sort of Follow Me React user, you could really make a Suey Lilligant into the star of the show. This thing obviously gets a really clear A tier for me. I'm actually going to put this at the top of A tier. I'm curious to see if this thing will actually become a really good meta presence. Lilligant didn't really do it for us this generation until literally the very last regional of Series 2. Well, the second to last one, because Scarlet, I think, is the last one. But it still, honestly, is an incredible piece for sure. And I think that any team would be definitely giving up a really strong physical option for Sun. Which we do still kind of lack. The fact that Great Tusk is really the only truly viable one. This will definitely give it a lot of competition as a good physical Sun fighting type. So definite A tier for sure. Meloetta Pirouette. This thing gets listed on a technicality because it's a form of a normal psychic type, but it is technically a fighting type Pokemon. It's kind of shitmon, to be honest, but it's good enough to where I am going to rank it today. This thing definitely gets the... honestly, I'm going to give this thing the D tier. It's a really niche Pokemon that you'd really only actually run specifically to catch opponents off guard with regular Meloetta. But Meloetta already isn't that great of a mon to begin with, and I feel like even still, Meloetta's normal psychic type benefits a lot more with its stat line than this one would. Essentially, this thing would have one benefit, and it would be on Tailwind builds, and that's really the only time I think it would actually be viable. Even still, I think there's a lot better fighting types for that, such as Suey Lilligant or Galli Zapdos, the Urshifus. We have Annihilate. You have a lot of better options, essentially. Great Tusk as well, and a lot of these Pokemon also can actually just revenge this thing off anyway. I don't really think the fact that you have to give up a turn clicking Relic Song is that great of an opportunity cost. So we're going to give this thing above Tauros. The only reason it gets the above Tauros to begin with, though, is because the fact that Tauros is at least an opportunity cost in itself by running regular Tauros Paldean over one of the other two. But the Intimidate ability is so good, and the pure fighting type isn't that terrible that I gotta give it at least the D tier still. Chestnut might be one of the worst Pokemon we've ranked so far, actually, funny enough. Chestnut isn't good. It's really not gonna be that good in this format. The stat line's okay. The speed tier is pretty middling. This thing is definitely not gonna be great in this format. Spiky Shield with like Super Fang is gonna be very specific, but I think we just have better uses of everything that this thing would provide to where we don't really care a lot about it. If I really wanted to run Spiky Shield, I'd run Glamora. If I really wanted to run a mon with Super Fang, I'd just run like Pachirisu or some other Mousehold set. And yeah, I don't even think that like Mousehold, Glamora are that exclusive of each other either. This doesn't really save you some valuable role. It's not really going to check anything unique outside of, I guess, like Great Tusk is something this would check. But even still, a lot of common Tusk partners would massacre this thing anyway, and with Terrestrial, if you were to try and check those Pokemon, because you would need to go into something like a Rock or like a Steel type to really beat Talonflame that well. At that point, you would just lose to Great Tusk anyway, because it would just massacre you with a fighting attack. I'm definitely going to actually give this thing an F tier. That might be a bit of a hot take. I don't think that Chestnut's going to be that good this gen, and I think this is going to be like the worst gen it's even had, which isn't to say that it had a good generation before, but I guess you can maybe make a case for it in Oras as like a really niche Pokemon, and this thing was just outright unviable in Generation 7, and I think it's outright unviable again in Generation 9. You could have maybe made a case for this thing in singles. I think if this was a singles tier list, you'd see it higher for sure, but in doubles, this thing is just really bad. Hawlucha, definitely like the worst generation the Hawlucha's ever had. It's not a great mon in doubles to begin with, but I think really the only generation that was worse for it was probably Generation 6. But even still, I don't know if it's that much. This thing does benefit, I guess, from having a good Psychic Terrain on Burden set, which Psychic Terrain is pretty good right now, actually, and this is a decent ability to take advantage of that. But even still, there's a lot of things that just outpace Oliviasama now. Whether it's just viable Tailwind mons like Fluttermane and Bundle, or the fact that there's just a lot better offensive pieces that can take advantage of Tailwind that would still sponge this thing really well anyway. Booster Energy as well is a really great way to just combat this Pokemon, because a lot of the Booster Energy mons would creep typical Hydro spreads, because you do kind of need the investment in your like attack with Adamant or your Bulk to actually take the hits. It's just not a great mon right now. However, I do acknowledge that this thing is at least better than the Meloetta Pirouette, so we're gonna give it the D tier. Passimian's kind of cool. This thing is a Defiant mon at base 80. However, honestly, we have a lot of better Defiant fighting types. If we pull up the list of Defiant fighting types, we can go through. We have Annihilape, we have Primeape, Valiance is not better, and we have Galazapdos. So already we have 3 that are actually, I would argue even Primeape is better, to be honest. The fact that you have a slightly better speed tier at 95 versus this thing's base 80, on top of the fact as well as you could throw in a Violate on and it's just a bulkier Pokemon. You have a better coverage set. Your attack stat isn't that much lower, and the fact that you would have the bulk to compensate for that would be better. Not only this, but Passimian is definitely a lot worse of a bulk abuser, just because of the fact that you wouldn't have the Violate to provide. This thing is, honestly, this thing might even be an F tier, but I'm gonna put it at the top of F right now. This thing might go up to D tier. I'm not really sure how I feel on it, to be honest, but it's not great for sure. Passimian Decidueye. I gotta say it, this thing proved me wrong. It got a lot of buffs this generation. Decidueye went from a pretty mediocre Pokemon in PLA's range to honestly a fucking great mon. This thing is scrappy for one, which is really good for it. This allows you to hit ghosts with your fighting attacks. You got a lot of actually good fighting moves this time around with stuff like Close Combat, Brick Break. You got stuff like Low Kick as well, Knock Off You Kept, Sucker Punch, Trailblaze to help combat your speed weakness. Triple Arrow is also being a base 90 attack that has high crit ratio. And it can also drop the defense by 1 stage with 50% chance to do so, and the 30% chance to flinch. Really incredible signature move that got such a huge buff in this gen. You also have U-Turn, which is a great way to provide momentum to your team. The fact that you have an okay typing, but it's pretty good with Terastal, and you have a way to boost your speed, where at +1 speed on a Tailwind team, you could actually make this thing work. I don't want to say this thing is an incredibly viable pick, but I would definitely be remiss to put this thing any lower than like above Toxicroak and Heracross in C tier. I'm not going to act like this thing will be an incredible pick, but it is actually a pretty unique mon in terms of checking Garganacl, because the fighting type that can actually really put some pressure on it both pre and post Terra, so you can essentially just no drawback Terra this and just go for a fighting stab, to where this thing would actually, I guess this thing might force Garganacl into Terra poison sets, but even still, you could definitely partner this thing with just a really good offensive Psychic and put a lot of pressure on that. This thing might be a pretty decent size spam partner, in fact. But I'm not sure. In fact, this could actually have some merit on size spam. Base 60 speed isn't that bad, and it would put a lot of pressure on Garganacl, which could wide guard past that. I might actually try that, to be honest. That could be a kind of cool way to run this mon. But anyway, C tier for sure. Definitely C tier. It's still very fucking niche, but it's good enough, I think, at this point. Crabominable. Sadly, this mon kind of sucks, I can't lie. This thing at least gets above Chestnut, I think, and Passimian actually. If nothing else, this is a unique presence that it provides with the typing and also the speed stat. Crabominable, if nothing else, has a pretty good 43 base, which among fighting types actually is pretty fucking slow. This under pace is even like Iron Hands level of slow, which is actually not bad. With Iron Hands especially also being a really common Terra Grass mon, you could actually maybe even use this as an Iron Hands check in theory with like a Terra Ice Hammer. I'm curious to see how much that actually does to Terra Grass sets. I assume that would actually OHKO. But maybe I'm overestimating Crabominable a little bit here. But if we pull up like Iron Hands, let's say, and we pop it into Terra Grass, you would essentially need to probably force a Terra beforehand, which maybe they wouldn't even Terra against this one. But if you were to run like a Terra Ice set versus just standard damage calc Terra Grass Iron Hands. Oops, not adaptability. What abilities can you even run on this mon? Iron Fist is actually pretty good. I'm pretty sure that does boost. No, that wouldn't boost Ice Hammer. Oh, never mind. It does actually boost Ice Hammer. That's kind of cool. And then, yeah, even without an Adamant Nature, you actually do guarantee the OHKO with the Terrestrial Ice and Ice Fist on Iron Fist, which is actually pretty good considering the fact that this thing is just a really good offensive threat. Now, you'd probably be running this thing with Brave, which is pretty good, because that would even further boost your damage output to where Iron Hands would essentially need a pretty heavy Fizdef set. With near max Fizdef, you can guarantee take the hit, but even still, it's pre-item, and with stuff like a Life Orb, for example, you guarantee the OHKO even versus max relaxed. So this could actually be an Iron Hands check in theory to like Terra Grass sets, for example, or Terra Steel sets, for example, which I guess is something. But it's such a niche, it's a niche beyond niche thing, because there's no guarantee that you even get the Force of the Terrestrial here. So I'm gonna give this thing an F tier. It's not good enough at its niche to where it would actually justify the ranking. I guess as well, this thing does get wide guard, which is kind of cool. You know what I've actually talked myself into putting this thing above Meloetta at least, I can't lie. This is enough of a cool support kit to where this is just like a kind of budget Hariyama. I kind of want to run this mod now. This thing is kind of fire. Phalanx. Phalanx is definitely D tier. This is just worse than Pessimian. This might actually be the least viable option, because if nothing else, at least this thing can drum. This thing's signature move just traps you in and you're kind of fodder. You're still not bulky enough to take hits. Objective F tier. And it's like the worst F tier we're going to rank today, probably, to be honest. Zamazenta. Zamazenta is kind of cool. I think unlike with the crown form for Zacian, there's not an actual huge opportunity cost here. So we're gonna give this thing the S tier still. It still is S tier. I think it's not like with Zacian where I'm tiering it out of pity for the opportunity cost, but it's still an objectively broken mon. This thing actually does kind of earn it. It's a great choice user, for example, with a good choice band and scarf merit, I would argue. It's also decent as like just an offensive piece in general. However, I think Zamazenta Crown does have a little bit more merit. I'm gonna put this thing. Actually, I'm going to put it above... yeah, I'm going to put it above Arceus Fighting, actually. This might be a hot take. But I think that Zamazenta Crown does have some merit this generation. For one, this thing actually can Terra. We have confirmation this thing can Terra, which is pretty fucking cool. Unless they patch that out in a later DLC, this thing can Terra. You could utilize this with stuff like Terrestrial Steel, for example. Get rid of your shitty fighting steel typing. You have Iron Defensive Body Press sets, which is pretty good. You could actually go with Terra Fighting and make this like a really viable physical wall. On top of this as well, you get stuff like dual screens, you get stuff like coaching. Well, no, you don't get coaching anymore. It's so sad. You get wide guard, which is pretty cool. A really fast wide guard user. You have, sadly, no Sword Stance. It's a pretty big L for this thing, but Howl is still an okay option to boost your attack, I guess, because you don't really have a better method to do so in this Pokemon. Helping Hand support is pretty nice. I just think it's enough going for it to where I actually think this is probably the best generation that Zamazenta had. And Zamazenta was actually a kind of viable mon last gen. It was a pretty decent check to Cali Ice, and I think it will actually continue to do so this gen. This thing could actually be a really strong check to that mon with stuff like Terra Steel set, for example, being a really good way around non-Terra Fighting or Terra Ground Cali Rex Ices. And you could definitely, at least for the fighting and for the ground set, just go for like a wide guard or like just a really heavy phys def investment with iron defense and then just body press and nuke it. So I definitely got to give it to this thing. It's definitely an S tier for sure. Urshifus. Now, we're going to do Single Strike and then Rapid Strike first because that's the dex order they come in. Ready? S plus tier, S tier. This thing is definitely for the Single Strike. This thing is one of the best Pokemon of all time, I would argue, in VGC. The fact that you could ignore Protect is fucking insane. It has an incredible speed stat for Tailwind. You get Sucker Punch priority. You have a really strong offensive typing of Dark Fighting. Pretty fucking obnoxious Pokemon. Even with the Wicked Blow slight damage nerf, this is still an incredible mon. With Urshifu Rapid, this thing does have one benefit, of course. It is typically the slightly better option in VGC, but I think this generation that's no longer the case. With the Single Strike option, you're a great option around Dark types, for example. Well, as a Dark type, for example, which is really appreciated for matchups like, for example, against Armor and Didi. It's also great as a really good resistance for a lot of different options for the Ruin Pokemon, since you would have resist all of their Dark stabs. This means for stuff like Throat Chop and Sucker Punch on for Chi and Pow, for example, it's pretty valuable there. On top of this as well, you're a really good Scarf user, and I think this one's a slightly better Scarf user. For Surging Strikes Urshifu Rapid, though, you do have the benefit of breaking Sash really easily, which is an incredibly unrivaled niche this thing does have. It's a really strong guarantee crit mon that can do so. However, I think that as well, the Single Strike form will have a slightly better matchup against stuff like Dozo and also the Garganacl matchup, which are two mons you would definitely really appreciate having the guarantee crit with. Urshifu Rapid won't be bad by any means, though. I just think it's going to be slightly outclassed this generation. That's not to say that in a future generation or once like the Scarlet and Violet DLCs come out that Urshifu Rapid will not rise to prominence over Single Strike, but I think if they were both to be released in the Regulation C format, that Single Strike would definitely have a slight merit over it, which is going to be, as far as we are aware, the final metagame that the pre-home and pre-DLC meta will provide. I'm assuming that's going to be the format the Worlds will go off of this year, so since that's what we're going to be doing the tier list off of, at least if these were allowed in that, I think the Single Strike will be better until we get like new DLC Pokemon. Not just the home stuff, I'm talking about like actual like Teal Mask and Indigo Disc sort of stuff. At that point, maybe we could justify Surging Strike stuff for Single, but for now, I think it's definitely going to be Single Strike for sure. Sneasler. Sneasler is going to be a pretty interesting pick. For one, this thing did get unburden as an ability, which is actually pretty cool because unlike with the Hawlucha, you do have a slightly higher speed stat and a lot better physical attack stat. The 120 is a little bit better for this thing, as you do end up actually getting a really nice offensive piece out of this. You could typically just run the poison fighting typing. I would probably go with something like, probably like a probably like a Terra Dark set, to be honest. That could be pretty good, or like a Terra Ghost, actually, but I'd probably go Terra Dark, to be honest, and just go with like Terra Blast, Dual Stab, and then like a Sword Stance, or maybe like a Protect. You can get a lot of mileage out of this. It'd be a pretty good fake out mon as well. Terra Dark would also give you a way to mitigate your 4x weakness to Psychic, which would help a lot with side spam matchups. You do get some pretty good options for support, like for example, Taunt and Fake Out. As well as for other support options, you can get stuff like Switcheroo, which is kind of cool. T-Spikes can be good for Dozo matchups. We've even seen like Biascarada running this manually, for example, so it's not to say a Sneasler wouldn't. I'm going to definitely give this thing an A tier right behind Hisui Lilligant. I think Hisui Lilligant will be slightly better, but Sneasler still has a place in this meta for sure. Quackleval, this thing gets the bottom of B tier, actually. I think with the Ruin Pokemon, this will actually be having a higher surge in usage. It's actually a really strong trick to all of them, and it's not even just off of the fighting typing. With the water typing as well, you put a lot of pressure on all of the forms, actually, because stuff like Chi-Yu, for example, would be threatened by that. Though I guess Chi-Yu would probably have, I guess, in theory, the best matchup against it besides Wo-Chien, considering the fact that Chi-Yu is typically run on Sun, at least, which could overwhelm you in theory because you'd partner with, like, Fluttermane. But cores like Tinglu, for example, will get pretty massacred by this because your dual stab would pretty much invalidate it. Next to, as well as against Chien Pao, you would also have a pretty good merit, as you could drop opponents' defenses and start stacking with Aqua Step pretty easily. But you could also be a pretty strong way to resist both primary stab on forms of priority from Chien Pao, which is pretty valuable, actually. And with one Aqua Step, you would even outpace Chien Pao, so that's pretty good. I think this is going to be the best form that Quackleval will actually have this entire generation. I think that once the home metagame comes out, this will go a little bit down. But I think that specifically with the Rune Pokemon only, this will definitely be the best time this has to shine. Definitive B tier. Palmot's a really good pick, actually, right now. This definitely gets the right below Hariyama. Actually, this gets right above Hariyama. This is the one mon in B tier that I will actually allow to outrank Hariyama. With Revival Blessing plus Fake Out, this is an incredible support piece right now. It's a great partner for Dozo teams, as it's able to bring in Dozo a second time. And most teams barely like handling it once. On top of this as well, you get some good priority stuff like Mach Punch. And with Terra Electric Double Shock, this is actually an incredible way for offensive Electric to do some work. Typically Electric isn't that great, but with Palmot specifically, you can actually get a lot of mileage out of that set. So this is definitely a B tier for sure for me. Really strong pick overall. Flamigo. Flamigo is everyone's favorite YouTuber Pokemon, and by that I mean I fucking think this is stupid. Such a bad Pokemon. This doesn't even get the YouTuber tier. It's actually F tier. Definitely really fucking shitty Pokemon. It takes so much to get this thing set up, and usually it's actually really easy to revenge this thing off, especially with stuff like Dragonite. We're getting into a Chien Pao metagame very shortly. You have a lot of fucking viable priority for this thing. It's an outright unviable Pokemon, I would argue. Even if you were to copy stuff like Dozo Boost, for example, with like a Toxic Orb Geary set, one, you're going to bring out a Geary, which is pretty terrible for your team. But two, Flamigo still gets pretty easily revenged by this anyway. We have Prankster Haze Murkrow that can usually clear this thing out, and it's still actually a fairly common pick, mind you. We still have Palafin Haze, which is on the rise right now. This thing is an outright unviable pick. I don't think it's good. It's never good. It's usually at best good to cheese opponents, but it's too bad even for a YouTuber pick. I would never justify this thing. F tier. Great Tusk. Great Tusk is fucking incredible. S tier Pokemon for sure. I'm actually going to rank this thing right below Urshifu Rapid. I think Urshifu Rapid will actually almost invalidate Great Tusk, but Great Tusk is still such a good Pokemon that I think that you could manage this on like a Tailwind team with like a Terra Grass set. They would actually need to adapt to like a Terra Grass set, to be honest, just to get around Urshifu Rapid, because I'm pretty sure, and I would need to double check this of course, but like a Banded Urshifu Rapid set, which would, keep in mind, outpace Great Tusk, would be able to actually manage to beat Great Tusk with Surging Strike. I do need to double check this of course. But yeah, with Surging Strikes, you would actually manage to OHKO that, even if it was a max HP set. So Great Tusk would actually need to adapt for that for sure, because this would essentially be like one of the best Talonflame Tailwind partners. I think you should outright invalidate opposing Great Tusk, which is already considered one of the best partners. And it's one of the only Pokemon that would actually just outright OHKO at turn 1, while still keeping up Tailwind pressure, which is pretty fucking insane. Great Tusk will definitely have a lot of issues. That's, in fact, actually, I'm going to put this in S+. This thing earns it off of that alone, because Talon Tusk will still be an incredible partnership across, in my opinion, the whole generation. Great Tusk is still an S tier, though. It's still really fucking good. But the fact this thing outright invalidates one of the best offensive cores right now, and it still is an incredible piece, mind you, for every other playstyle. Definite S+ tier for sure. I think this thing, so it doesn't really matter. They're both pretty fucking equal for what it's worth, I think, in hindsight. But they're both up there. This thing, though, definitely gets an S tier for sure. It's probably going to be the best S tier that we have today. In fact, yeah, I would actually say this is the best S tier, and that might be a bit of a hot take. Well, no, second best S tier, I forgot. Nope, never mind, because I'm thinking of the other mon. Yeah, it's the best S tier that we're going to have today. And that'll come up very shortly. Slitherwing, though, this thing gets, honestly, the thing gets a bottom of B tier. Pretty cool mon. I think it's a good Terrestrial user. We've actually seen this thing do well on online tours. For example, Moxie Boosted did really well in one of the Needle Bros tournaments with top 16. Pretty fucking incredible run. This thing has also done some okay results in tournament. I think this thing might have gotten a top cut. Nope, it wasn't in Vancouver. This thing wasn't in Natal. This thing was in Perth. Where was it in Perth? This thing got 56 overall. That's actually not terrible considering this thing does at least get CP. This thing in Knoxville, this thing got 110th. That's not great, but it's better than I thought. Bojum, it didn't really do anything. OCIC, it didn't really do anything. Orlando, it got one placement though, and that was at 49th. It's not terrible actually. So overall, I mean, Slitherwing hasn't had great performances in person, but online it's done okay. So we'll give it the bottom of B. I think it's definitely got potential though, but I think it's gonna go down in usage for sure when the ruins come, because I think there's just a lot of better fighting types that will match up into those. I guess it's a fighting type that matches up really well into Wo-Chien, which is pretty good, because I think Wo-Chien will be pretty fucking insane. But at the same time though, the attack drop does also hurt Slitherwing a bit, and with Terrestrial you could get around it, so it's whatever. B tier for sure. Iron Hands S+ for sure. This thing will definitely be. I'm pretty sure another tier list actually did rate Shifus above this. I'm not sure how I feel about that right now though, actually. I'm gonna give their Shifus the benefit of the doubt. They will be slightly better meta presences, and the fact that they're gonna be really good on archetypes like Tailwind. They're really good for priority options in general. The fact that they are typically just really strong Terrestrial users, or even without Terrestrial, they're still really incredible breakers, and they will break better than most Terrestrial Pokemon anyway. I think that they'll still be slightly better, but it's a slim margin. If someone was to tell me that Iron Hands they thought was going to be better than Urshifu, I'd at least get where they're coming from. I'm kind of unsure where I feel in this one, truthfully. I think that really all three of these just are slightly below Groudon, but they're all four really fucking insane meta presences. But I'm not sure which I'd rate higher. Definitely S tier for S+ for sure though. Valiant gets like a high B tier. I'm gonna give it right below Galliot actually. I think Galliot is slightly better. Valiant still is pretty cool though. 116 speed is great. It's a good mixed attacker. It's great with Icy Wind and Wide Guard support, which is pretty good. But I think Galliot just does the job slightly better as a Wide Guard user. It's a pretty good option with speed control because it's a good Trick Room user at base 80, which is typically unprecedented for a lot of Pokemon. As well as the fact that this thing does handle slightly better teams offensively with stuff like the Crit Scope Lens set, which Valiant doesn't really do even if you were to boost energy in offense for whatever reason. So I'm not going to give Valiant any higher than like right below Galliot. The typing is still incredible. Fairy Fighting is a fucking insane typing. But I just don't think that Iron Valiant takes the job that well in this format. If it was like 20 base bulkier and traded out like, well, no, honestly, I think it'd be kind of hard to make this Pokemon really viable. It's truly off of the speed stat. If this thing was like as fast as Bundle or faster than Bundle, this thing would be an easy S tier, like maybe even an S+, to be honest, because you could justify running this as an Icy Wind user and tie with Bundle and just offensively beat it. But the speed stat being 116 really hurts because even like Roaring Moon with booster outpaces this, which is really sad. So we'll give it the B tier. Annihilape is our final mon. This gets right below Great Tusk actually. I think that Great Tusk has usurped the spot of Annihilape as a slightly better option, though Mausape is still an incredible core, and it still isn't in general a really strong option as an offensive fighting type here. Rage Fist is objectively a really broken move. This thing is a great Scarfer with Final Gambit. It's a great, really good breaker with Bulk Up, with Terra Fire, Steel, Fighting, Ghost, Grass, Water. It has a lot of good Terra types. This thing is a great mon overall, really one of the most splashable Pokemon in the format, though I think a Great Tusk has a lot better of a meta presence right now, and it's still top cutting really as well, if not slightly better than Annihilape is. Iron Hand still has a slight meta presence, but I would actually argue that as the format goes on, that Great Tusk and Annihilape will eventually catch up, but they're not there yet. As of right now, this is going to be my rankings though. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this list, and if you did, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more. I appreciate all of you guys, of course, for watching to the end, and if you want to see some more content, of course, click on the channel member button. We did just actually have a channel member video where we went to Master Ball with Monotype Fairy, so that was pretty cool. Hopefully you guys will enjoy that. We have a members poll going up for a few more hours where we're going to be pulling our next challenge run, so I hope to see you guys there. Shout out to our channel members, of course, to keep the channel alive. We have Zeke Zero, Mia, Josh K Ultra Player, Matt O'Shea, Bbat, Anna Duper, and Timo Mueller. You guys' support of the channel is greatly appreciated, and if you want to become a channel member today, link to that is going to be down below as well. And I hope to see you guys in tomorrow's video. Until then, peace out, guys.